So the Charlie Kirk Memorial, as expected, was a really huge event. I think they were anticipating getting 100,000 people, and they may have gotten even more than that. And then at one point, there were 500,000 people watching the live stream. So this was a crazy and unexpected turnout for somebody that people are saying isn't really that big of a deal, didn't really have an influence. He was just a controversial person. And so even to this day, despite watching so many videos, so many clips, so many interviews, and trying to really understand who Charlie Kirk was in his own words based on things that actually came out of his mouth, it is still hard to understand the depth of his impact. Like, I understand that he has a impact, obviously, from how people are reacting, but I still can't quite comprehend the depth of his impact and the loss that we feel as a result of what happened to him. I was really excited going into this memorial because I really wanted to see how his life was going to be celebrated, what was going to happen. Were there going to be any protesters? Was there going to be anything crazy happening? And for the most part, everything went very well. I think I only saw one news story of someone who was arrested either yesterday or early this morning, and I don't have any other details on that, but that was the only thing that I heard about. And then there were some people protesting outside, and if I can find a clip on that, I'll add that in, but that was really the only crazy thing that I saw. And then obviously we had people trolling online and saying whatever they wanted, but for the most part, this was a extremely well done service. The turnout was huge. Some of the names I didn't know of because it wasn't on the list that they released, or on the list that they released, it was names that we would have known, and so there were probably 10 to 15 people who spoke, and maybe 7 names were on the list or something like that. And so all of it was definitely worth watching because I attended a live stream of a sermon today that happened about 8:30, and then I signed up to get notified when the Charlie Kirk Memorial went live, and it went live maybe around 10 or something like that, which I wasn't expecting. And then maybe for the first 50 minutes to an hour, so maybe 10 to 11, it was just like a title card, and then it switched to showing the stadium, and then they started having the worship portion, the singing, the songs portion, and then it kind of flowed from there. I would say that the event, if you count everything from maybe 11 a.m. Eastern, it just ended maybe at 7:15 p.m. It officially started at 2 p.m., so 2 p.m. to about 7:15. I've been watching the live stream since about 10:30, 11, just to give myself a little bit of a buffer there. And so it's been a really long and chaotic day. A lot of stuff happened, a lot of words, a lot of speeches, a lot of emotional reactions to everything going on. And it was just a really good experience as well, just to see how other people were impacted, because you had people traveling, flying to Arizona. On social media, I saw that on one plane, they were singing Amazing Grace, and then people were talking about how the other passengers either had t-shirts, hats, or whatever, just kind of honoring and celebrating Charlie Kirk. And so you can really see the impact that Charlie Kirk has had on people, because in one of my last videos, I talked about how basically off of social media in my local community, I'm not really seeing anything, but it is nice to know that other people are seeing the direct impact that this assassination has had on their local communities. And so it's really nice that a lot of people showed up to support Charlie Kirk, waiting in line from 4 a.m. local time in Arizona time to make sure that they could get in, get a seat, and watch this event. And from what they were saying, I think they had between 7 and 10 days to put everything together. Everything was well done for the most part. There was one awkward moment. It was when President Trump came out to speak, and then there was a singing portion going on at the same time, so he was just standing there awkwardly, and he kind of engaged a little bit and kind of danced or whatever to the song, but that was just really awkward, and I didn't know if it was supposed to be like that, because you just have him standing there awkwardly while the guy is singing, and so that just seemed a little bit weird to me and mistimed, but I'm not sure if that was intentional. Obviously, I would assume that it was intentional, but I think that that could have been staggered a little bit. Have the guy do his song for a little bit, and then have President Trump come out after that to speak. So again, today has been a super long day. It's 7:30. I'm recording this video. The sermon or the service just ended maybe 15 to 20 minutes ago, and it's been a long spiritual day in the best way, because I was excited about the sermon that I watched earlier this morning, and it was a follow-up to the one that I watched from the previous Sunday, where it was really talking about light versus dark in relation to the Charlie Kirk shooting and just the general chaos of people cheering and celebrating murder. And the pastor, he mentioned, the 10 Commandments, it says thou shalt not murder, but people think that it says thou shalt not kill. And he was going into the difference between murder and kill. Murder, you're taking innocent life. Kill, it may be self-defense or something like that, right? And so he really made a point to make the distinction between the two. Okay, so let's get into the service. So my general thoughts on the service, I really liked how they did the tribute video, and it was basically showing clips of Charlie Kirk that we've mostly seen, but what I was not expecting was unreleased footage from basically the hours, or like the 30 minutes to an hour before he was shot. So they show him pulling up to the event to have the Prove Me Wrong debate. You see him arriving in the car, you see him throwing out hats, and then you see him sit down, and then obviously we know that 20 minutes later he was dead. He was shot dead. And so that's just really crazy when you see someone's last moments of life leading up to when they were killed, because this is completely unrelated, but it makes me think of the Tupac movie and how the night that he was shot, we see him getting ready in his hotel room or whatever it is, and then he goes to the place that's going to be the place where he ends up dead. And so it's really crazy to see that for Charlie Kirk, to see how excited he was to get to the arena. He was interacting with people, throwing the hats, and then he sat down, and then all of the fans were basically cheering that he was there. Like, they were glad that he was there, but I'm also sure that there were people there to debate him and try to get a rise out of him or whatever, get their kind of 15 minutes of fame, right? But the crowd was excited that he was there, and so that's really crazy to understand how that event turned out. And I'm actually confused on something, because I saw reports saying that Charlie Kirk's daughter and wife were there, but then I read another story where it basically said that she was on the plane on the way there, and she found out that he was dead, I guess, in air. And so I'm not 100% sure if she was there or if she wasn't. And then she also told the story of how basically they told her, like, hey, you may not want to see his body. And she said, yes, I want to see him. She wanted to see the wound, the damage, what they did to him when they killed him. And then she also talked about something else that I'll get into later, but it was just really crazy to hear that detail about that day, because a lot of stuff we've heard bits and pieces of it from other people, but this is like a first-hand account of something, right? And then also there's a video that I've been meaning to watch with, I think, Frank Turek, if I'm saying his last name correctly. He is, I don't know what he is he a pastor or something like that? I'm not 100% sure, but he was in the car with Charlie Kirk that day, and he was talking about, hey, they tried to work on him, there was nothing that we could do. Basically, he was looking at me, but he was looking past me, he was already gone, that sort of thing. And so it was just really crazy to have that first-hand account of what happened that day. And the one thing they kept talking about throughout this memorial service was how Charlie Kirk was big on saying big government sucks, and he had like this sticker or this button pin thing that basically was his slogan or whatever for when he was first starting out. People talked about how they first met him and what he was like, and then also they talked about how he was big on debating, and he really wanted to change people's minds by convincing them. He really wanted to have that discussion and be able to talk through his points and get the other side to see his point. And they also talked about how he had the biggest microphone in conservative media, and he shared his microphone with other people. He gave them a platform to share their ideas, to debate him, and it wasn't just like he was all about himself. He was really trying to put those conversations in the national spotlight, and I think that makes a whole lot of sense when you hear his interview with Tucker Carlson, where he's talking about, hey, I'm trying to tell these people in charge, but they're not really listening to me and all of that stuff, right? And so he is getting that conversation out in the open to where everyone can hear it and can make a decision for themselves on what they think about the discussion. And then I'm going to talk about the speakers a little bit later, but this is kind of just part of my general thought. There was a moment where Don Jr. was talking, and he was basically talking about how Charlie Kirk went to his first event, and the cops told him, hey, we can't guarantee your safety, and they decided to go through with the event anyway. And so this tells you basically for all of the I think, 10, 11 years that Charlie Kirk has been doing this and has been in the spotlight trying to have these open debates and these honest conversations. He's always had a target on his back, and he was very aware of that. And so I think it's really crazy when you think about people who are doing the right thing, wanting to have these conversations despite the grave threats and danger that they face, to just do something that is very simple and that everyone should be able to do. Everyone should be able to have an open conversation, a debate, and discuss different ideas and opposing opinions without it leading to violence. And I didn't mention this earlier when I was talking about just like the day leading up to me watching this memorial. Just before I watched the sermon from my local church, I also watched a video from Pastor John. I can't say his last name, but it starts with an A, and his video is basically on how Charlie Kirk was not a racist. And so in that video, he plays a debate or a discussion that they hosted 3 years ago, and it was basically them having a conversation about the Black community and all of this stuff and what it means to be a Black pastor and all of that stuff. And so that was really good to watch leading into this memorial service, because you do have a lot of people who are coming out and defending Charlie Kirk and saying, no, this is actually what he is about, and then you still have people who think that, hey, he was a racist, blah blah blah, and all of this stuff. And so it's just really interesting when you hear so many conflicting and contrasting opinions on who Charlie Kirk was. And so all of that aside, I'm really glad that I did watch this memorial service to hear what people had to say about Charlie Kirk. And obviously nobody's going to trash him. Like, the people who are there to celebrate him, they're not going to trash him. But I think that it is important that when you have someone who has done as much good as Charlie Kirk has, that you honor that and you celebrate that, regardless of what you think his flaws are. And I really should mention this later on when I'm talking about the speakers, but Ben Carlson spoke, and I think one of the points that he brought up was how people talk about how Charlie Kirk didn't go to college. And I saw this on the Don Lemon live stream with, I think, a guy named Jolly or something like that, and they were basically making fun of Charlie Kirk and saying, hey, you're trashing Ketanji Brown Jr. and Sheila Lee Jackson when they have these advanced degrees and you didn't even go to college and all of that stuff, right? And so a lot of people think that because you have a degree or you have a number of degrees, that means you're more intelligent than other people. And so Ben Carlson was talking about how there are a lot of people who think he's not intelligent without realizing that you can get your intelligence, your knowledge, and your wisdom from things outside of the classroom. And he's a great example of that, because throughout this memorial service, they talked about how he had a lot of knowledge, he read a lot of books and all of that stuff. And I'm kind of intermingling things that I've heard him say in other videos and clips. He's able to debate people off the cuff without any notes and all of that stuff. And you have to have a lot of knowledge in order to be able to do that. And so I think that people don't give him enough credit for having all of this knowledge despite not going to school, despite not having a college degree the traditional way, because I think he has a honorary degree from Liberty University, and then I think Hillsdale College may be giving him an honorary degree as well. And now getting to something that I mentioned earlier, going back to Erika Kirk. And so she was talking about how she went to see his body, and she said that he had this small smile on his face. And so she's really talking about how basically he was there one moment and then he was gone in the blink of an eye, how he didn't feel any pain and all of that stuff. And so that does make you feel better to know that he didn't suffer, because it was a really horrible video to see him being shot like that, and the result that we can see, but understand also that he didn't experience any pain. He was here and then he was gone. And with what she's saying about the smile, she's basically saying hey, he saw the Savior, he saw Jesus, he saw God, and he knew that he was going to heaven and all of that stuff. And so it does make you feel good to know that he wasn't in pain and he knew where he was going and all of that stuff. Even I would imagine in some sense he would have been super confused to have been debating one moment and then next to God in the next moment. And I wonder if, intellectually, mentally, or whatever, spiritually, knew that he was in heaven and understood what was happening. Okay, moving on, I want to get into the crowd. So we talked about how there was a super packed arena, people lined up at 4 a.m. local time, and then there were some people who parked their cars and had to walk like a mile or two to get to the arena and then wait in very long lines. And for the songs that they sung, I didn't really know a lot of them. I'm not a religious person. I didn't know any of the performers, but I was able to find basically a playlist or a set list on Twitter, and I can add a screenshot of that so that you can hear the people who performed and the songs that they sang, because there was one moment where they were singing a song. It might have been Hallelujah or Gratitude or something like that by Brandon Lake, and then at one point the whole arena was singing that song with the performance, so that was a really powerful moment to see. Getting into the speakers, so I was not sure of the speaking order because, again, as I mentioned, they had people who spoke who weren't on the list of speakers that they announced, and the list of speakers that they announced were mainly elected politicians and all of that stuff, people in the White House, and then they had other people speak who either knew Charlie personally or knew him from TPUSA. And I did see a very interesting tweet earlier because they were talking about how basically Erika and her family, like Erika and their kids, are getting a lot of attention, but they're not really talking about his mom and dad or his sister. And I came across a tweet that had a picture of his family from when he was younger, and it was super interesting that his dad or his mom or his sister didn't speak, and I wonder how involved they were in this memorial service. And it made me think of Kobe Bryant's family, how I know that he, I think, had his memorial service in the Lakers arena, and then I know that Vanessa spoke, but I don't know if his family was invited, allowed to attend, or anything like that. And so I'm wondering, in terms of his immediate biological family that he grew up, what was their involvement in the service? And nobody's really talked about them a lot, and so I just found that interesting. Getting back to the speakers, so I wasn't really sure the order of how they were going to have people speak. I didn't know if Erika was going to go first, if she was going to go last, and then we got to a point where it was J.D. Vance, and then basically Erika and Trump were left, and I wasn't sure if Trump was going to go and then Erika, but Erika went and then Donald Trump spoke, and so it was really good to hear all of the different speakers. And also just getting back to the speakers, some people spoke kind of from the regular podium, and then others spoke behind the bulletproof glass. And so we had the people in the White House who spoke behind the bulletproof glass. Erika did as well, and then Tucker Carlson, Ben Carlson, Benny Johnson, Jack Posobiec, if I'm saying his last name correctly, they did not speak from behind the bulletproof glass. And then I was really surprised that the glass was there because this was an indoor arena. I believe they had the roof covered, and so I imagine they would have been very tight on security with this event, given that they had so many people from the White House at this event in general. And so I don't know if the glass was there symbolically, or if they still thought, hey, something could happen, let's just make sure that we have this set up. So that was very interesting to see. Now, in terms of what the speakers talked about, a lot of them talked about the impact that Charlie had on them personally. So we had people talking about how Charlie encouraged them to get married. Charlie was nice to people that he either knew in passing or people who didn't have big roles within the government. So they talked about how he would pray for a staffer who was going through a difficult time, and he was just really giving and generous with his time and his relationships with other people outside of the big names that we know. And then they also touched on the themes of a revival and just like the general reaction in this arena to people wanting to be there and celebrate Charlie Kirk. And so I thought that Benny had the most impassioned speech, and he spoke directly to this moment, and Tucker did a little bit, but I think Benny spoke to it the most, and so we can just play that clip.
Fight for Charlie Kirk. Who feels the Holy Spirit in the house tonight? Who can feel that revival happening right now? How does it always work? What man intends for evil, God intends for good. Evil thought that there would be a funeral today. God has created a revival right here in this house right now.
So that was a really big moment because he's talking about the energy in the room. He's talking about how holy it feels, and he's also talking about how people thought they were going to be sad and moping and it was going to be a funeral, but no, it's a revival. By shooting and killing Charlie Kirk, you actually created this unintended chain of reaction to where people are going to church, they're picking up a Bible, and they're doing positive things instead of lashing out, creating violence, attacking people, and all of that stuff that you would normally see in this type of situation. You would see a revolt, you would see a revolution, and instead you're seeing a revival and people turning to God or turning inward and wanting to better themselves and their communities. And then I also thought that Jack had a good speech as well, so we can play that.
Day, Moses climbed to the top of the mountain, and he looked across the river Jordan, and he saw the promised land. He led the people there, but he did not cross himself, for he was taken, and he died on that mountain, and he was brought to God's kingdom. On his last day, Charlie Kirk was on the top of a mountain. And Charlie Kirk led us there. And Charlie Kirk has brought us to the promised land.
Okay, I want to pause it there because, again, there is this theme of talking about how Charlie Kirk's death has led us to this moment where we're getting a revival, we're getting people closer to God, people wanting to go to church, pick up Bibles, and all of that stuff. So it's had a positive impact.
Murder. The true word for what Charlie did is sacrifice. You see, the difference between murder and sacrifice is that sacrifice is a gift. Sacrifice is that last full measure of devotion for God, for country, and for his people, and for his family.
I'm going to pause it here because I do like the idea of a sacrifice because, as I mentioned, he has been getting death threats from day one since he's wanted to go out and speak to people. And so, yes, he is sacrificing his lifetime with his family in order to have these open discussions and these debates. And so I think it is important to acknowledge that. But I also know that people talk about sacrifice in the sense of people being intentionally killed to further someone else's agenda. I think you can look at that word in both contexts, but obviously he means here Charlie Kirk put himself on the line in order to make a difference, and so I think that's the one that we should focus on more.
Of you. And Charlie Kirk's gift of his sacrifice means that Charlie Kirk will live forever, not just for all of us, not just for his family and Erika and for his children, but for all future generations of Americans. And the question of our time, will Western civilization endure? Or will it fracture in two, like so many predict?
I want to pause it here because now what he's speaking to is the idea of a civil war happening because of all of this tension, because of all of this divide, and we keep getting further divided, and shootings keep happening, crimes keep happening, and so really we have to make a decision about the kind of country that we want going forward. What are we learning from this situation?
Well, I say to you that a century from now, when they write of the 2 or 3 pivotal moments that led to the saving of Western civilization, they will write that the sacrifice of Charles James Kirk was the turning point.
I think it's really powerful to acknowledge that, yes, this is a turning point. This is a huge moment in American history that this happened to Charlie Kirk, because you can always think of America as fighting other people, but this is really an instance and a demonstration of the infighting within America, to where this is not something that you would it happen, but not on this scale, to where, when was the last time that you saw a assassination that was successful, right? Like Donald Trump's assassination failed. That was an attempted assassination, but the last one that I can think of a major politician and a major political figure would have been RFK, I think, is the last one between JFK and MLK and RFK. And so you can kind of see how far we have, I guess, kind of revert it in a sense that if RFK was the last one and then we've gone, that was like what, late 1960s, and now 2025 is when we have another assassination, so we've kind of reverted back to that 1960s energy where people are infighting, people are trying to attack each other, and we really cannot get along with people who do not agree with whatever our beliefs are. Okay, moving on, the next clip I want to play is from Tucker Carlson, and so he too spoke on the energy in this room and how it was like a revival and God was here. You could clearly feel his presence in the room, and then he was also talking about his relationship with Charlie Kirk, and I think he did make a dig at the White House basically, or the people in charge, and I do just want to play that clip.
And I can just sort of picture the scene in a lamplit room with a bunch of guys sitting around eating hummus thinking about what do we do about this guy telling the truth about us. We must make him stop talking. And there's always one guy with the bright idea, and I can just hear him say, I've got an idea, why don't we just kill him?
I want to pause it here because that's kind of an awkward comment to make, because I get what he's saying, but he's basically talking about someone who was basically saying things that the general public didn't like, and then they wanted to kill him. And so I think that's kind of a little bit tone deaf, but it's also appropriate because this is that situation that he's describing is exactly what happened to Charlie Kirk. And so it is connected and it is related, but it's also awkward to bring up. So we can just continue watching.
Fix the problem.
And then his laugh.
It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Everything is inverted, and the Beatitudes tell it, I think, the most crisply. Everything is sort of the opposite of what you think it's going to be. Blessed are those who...
I want to pause it here because this is a really good point, because again, people thought that by killing Charlie Kirk that this was going to have the opposite effect that it had. They thought there was going to be rioting, looting, and chaos and all of that stuff, but it's actually not like that at all. Everyone is upset. There are a lot of people who are upset and mourning, but they're not taking out their anger and creating chaos.
Mourn, for they will be comforted. That is true, and you can feel it here. The thing about Charlie's message, I've thought a lot about it, and I'm trying not to be emotional because in addition to everything else, he was a wonderful man and a decent man, and one of those rare people you meet who you just groove with in conversation and have these very intense conversations that you don't stop thinking about, which is my experience with him. But the main thing about Charlie...
And I want to pause it here because, again, I did just listen to his interview with Charlie Kirk from like a month ago, but I think we have another interview from 2 months ago that I want to watch. And it's really in that interview from a month ago where you can really see where Charlie Kirk is kind of breaking things down for Tucker, and it's things that he didn't quite think about to that degree. And so you can see where Charlie Kirk is like opening people up and exposing them to things that they didn't really think about. And for a lot of people, because they're older, it's going to be things that they're not thinking about because it doesn't affect them in the same way that it affects the younger generation.
And his message, he was bringing the gospel to the country. He was doing the thing that the people in charge hate most, which is calling for them to repent.
So this I'm kind of confused by, because I think this is the dig that I was talking about to the people in charge. And so he's saying like, hey, the people in charge, this is what they hate, you making them repent and basically think about what they're doing. So what exactly are you speaking to when you say that? Yes, you're speaking in a religious sense, but you're also probably talking about some policies and government decisions, I would assume, right? And so I think that if that is the case, this is big for him to say it on this platform, knowing that Donald Trump and other people from the White House are here in person and can hear this message.
So how is Charlie's message different? And Charlie was a political person who was deeply interested in coalition building and in getting the right people in office because he knew that vast improvements are possible politically. But he also knew that politics is not the final answer. It can't answer the deepest questions, actually. That the only real solution is Jesus.
Okay, so that's the end of the clip, and so here he's talking about how he was religious, and a lot of what he was trying to do stemmed from a religious point, but that also intersects it with politics because of his connections that he had to people in politics who were making decisions. Because I saw a TikTok where someone was talking about, oh, he's not a political figure, he's not like determining kind of like surfacey or kind of basic topics about politics and the government and all of that stuff, but yes, he is a political figure because he is having difficult conversations about things that there could be policies on or things that there are policies on in terms of government and the Constitution and how our country is run, right? He's not just having conversations about a TV show that doesn't really have that much of a impact in terms of politics, right? And so these conversations that he's having, this role that he plays very much intersects with religion and politics. And that's why I think that, yes, he is a political figure. He's a conservative. He is really talking about his values in terms of religion and how that impacts what he thinks about politics. And so the two go hand in hand, because if you have certain religious beliefs, that is going to affect how you think about politics and the things that you want to happen. And so the two are intertwined. You can't separate it and say, oh, he's just talking about religion and his personal belief that has nothing to do with politics. The two are very much intertwined. Okay, moving on, I want to talk about Donald J. Trump. So he spoke after Erika, so I'm going to talk about him first very briefly because I did listen to what he was saying, but I was also preparing my notes for this video, so I missed a bit of it. And so basically he was talking about different events that have happened, and he was basically kind of linking that back to Charlie Kirk. He did speak maybe for about 20 minutes or so. It felt like he spoke for a really long time. And so he was just talking about different things that had happened, maybe from his first term to stuff that has happened now, and kind of tying that back to Charlie wanting him to speak to certain people or go and have a debate or something like that, a speech or something like that, right? He was really putting or trying to get Trump in places to where he could have an impact based on the things that Charlie was hearing. And then he also talked about his relationship with Charlie. So we won't spend too much time on that, but by the time that Donald J. Trump was speaking, the live stream was at 609,000 people watching the live stream. So that just showed you how many people were watching, because I think at one point it may have been around 300k people who were watching maybe at the very beginning, so around 2 p.m. and that number just kept getting higher throughout the service. Now, I want to move on to Erika's speech. So this was really good and this was impactful, and it was different from the speech that she gave 2 days after the assassination. And so a lot of people loved that speech, and then some people didn't like it, especially with the recruitment for TPUSA. She can say whatever she wants in that speech, right? People are naturally going to either not want to be involved with TPUSA, or they're going to be motivated to sign up as a result of what happened and their personal feeling about politics, religion, and Charlie Kirk, right? And so I don't have an issue either way with what she said in her first speech, but I also thought that this speech was a little bit different because she really spoke on her relationship with Charlie, what he was called to do, how he was prepared to die because he really was devoted and committed to this mission of speaking to young people. Next, I want to play a clip on Erika speaking.
There was no keeping score between us. We were a team, working together for the same mission.
I want to pause it here because, again, she had her first speech 2 days after the assassination, and then she's speaking here, and she was very overwhelmed when she first came out, and I think that probably has to do with the difference between her first speech, where it was just her in the room, and she was live streaming to, I think, about 100k people who are watching, but you don't actually see those people, right? You're talking to a camera with lights and all of that stuff, so it's very different. And in this room, I think she's basically speaking to almost the same number of people in the room, but it's very different when you can see all of those people and then you're overwhelmed, because she would have been listening to all of these other people speak leading up into when she spoke, and I don't know if she paid attention to every speaker, if she was just really focusing on her kids and all of that stuff, like taking time to herself, because she was really shocked and surprised when she came out by just like the love in the room and the amount of people there for Charlie.
I never wanted to be the one standing between Charlie and the task that God prepared for him, had set for him. And I knew Charlie would always do his best to help me with the same. My marriage with Charlie was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I know it was the best thing that ever happened to him as well. He wanted everyone to experience that joy. And that's what's so beautiful.
I'm gonna pause it here because I really love what she said about marriage and how they were basically happy in their marriage, and Charlie Kirk wanted everyone to get married and experience that. I think we should all strive to be married. I want to be married one day and have that beautiful union and connection with someone else. And so I think when you have that and it's a good marriage, you're married to the right person, it can be something beautiful. But people do not want to get married because they're anticipating getting divorced or marrying the wrong person and having something crazy happen, losing half your money and all of that stuff, right? But when you go into it wanting a happy marriage and you marry the right person, it truly can be a beautiful experience, and that is what people should strive for.
About God's design for marriage is that everyone can. I could talk endlessly about it, and years to come I will. But Charlie's mission above all was aimed directly at those who aren't married. He named his organization well. He knew things were not right with America, and especially with young people.
I want to pause it here because the Lost Boys of the West basically came up a few times, I think, in this memorial service, and definitely in other videos and clips that I've watched, where he was really concerned about young men not having any purpose in life, not getting married, not really fully participating in the culture and society. And when they don't own anything, they don't have a family and all of that stuff, they're not motivated to participate in society the same way a man who is a father or a husband would. And so they really talked about how he had this intense or this strong connection to young America and young boys in general.
And they needed a new direction. Charlie passionately wanted to reach and save the lost boys of the West. The young men who feel like they have no direction, no purpose, no faith, and no reason to live. The men wasting their lives on distractions, and the men consumed with resentment, anger, and hate. Charlie wanted to help them. He wanted them to have a home with Turning Point USA. And when he went onto campus,
I want to pause it here because this is super important, because she's basically talking about how Charlie Kirk was trying to open people up to these conversations and think differently, but he was also trying to be a role model for young men and young boys in America. Like, hey, you know, this is what you should strive for. You should have a relationship with God, you should be religious, and you should know the Bible well enough so that you could live according to a certain standard, right? And so he was trying to be that example for young men, and now he's not here to do that anymore. And so that is sad when you think about men not having a father figure in their life and they don't have anyone to look up to. But when we give them someone to look up to who has those qualities that you want a man to have, you assassinate him, and then you make it difficult for those young men to become really good fathers and really good husbands and contributors to society because they don't have a role model. Now we have to find another role model who is worthy of being a role model for the younger generation.
he was looking to show them a better path and a better life that was right there for the taking. He wanted to show them that. My husband, Charlie.
I want to pause it here because the guy who shot Charlie Kirk, I think Tyler Robinson is his name. Let me just double check that to make sure. Yep, Tyler Robinson. So imagine if Tyler Robinson, because a lot of Charlie Kirk's clips are being played out of context and people are misquoting him, imagine if that is what Tyler Robinson heard instead of going to one of these debates and hearing him in full context and having a conversation and speaking with Charlie Kirk himself. I wonder what that moment would have looked like, and would he have been able to get through to Tyler, or would he have resorted to reacting in this way because Charlie Kirk didn't like his lifestyle or whatever, right? And so I wonder how a conversation between the two of them would have went, and that is crazy to think that, I don't know that Charlie Kirk could necessarily reach this kid, but did he know exactly what Charlie Kirk was saying, or did he go off of hearing misquoted and out of context clips, and that is what he formed this plan out of?
He wanted to save young men, just like the one who took his life. That young man. On the cross, our Savior said, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." That man, that young man, I forgive him.
That was a really big moment when she said that she forgives him for what he did. And if you could see the people reacting in the crowd, some people were tearing up, like you could see them tearing up. They stood up and all of that stuff because they understand what a big moment is. Because when you have those court cases where people are sentenced and the victims can, the family members of the victims can give the victim impact statement, and they either say like, hey, I'm never going to forgive you, or I forgive you. And so it is really big, but that's the energy that she's taking here. Because just before the memorial service, I did see a article where it was basically saying that she doesn't want to be the one to make the decision on whether or not Tyler Robinson should get the death penalty. And again, that just speaks to that Christian energy of wanting to forgive and wanting to make sure that you can get to heaven, right? Like, you act in ways that will get you to heaven. You don't resort to bitterness and doing crazy stuff that are going to get you basically not to heaven, right? And so here's a moment here that she says on air, on camera, I forgive him. Basically, I want to move forward with my life. I don't want this to hold me back. I don't want to turn to a bitter, negative person because I'm upset that this happened, right? Like, obviously, she's going to be upset, but she's not going to let it basically corrupt her by having this hate for the shooter, right? And so this definitely was a very emotional moment for me, listening to her speak live when she first came on, and I definitely teared up at times because it is sad when you think about this woman who's lost her husband, the father of her kid, just because he was having conversation and people didn't like what he said. And I think it's completely different if you didn't like what he said and you know everything that he said versus not liking what he said because you heard out of context clips, right? And so this was definitely a big moment to hear her speak. And there is a slight difference, I think, between her first speech and this second speech, because in her first speech, she was really talking about the evildoers and all of that stuff and the people who killed her husband. And she's talking about it in the same way in this speech, but it's a little bit different, especially with her saying, I forgive him for what he has done. So we can go ahead and leave that there. Alrighty, so to wrap up this video, I definitely jumped around a lot between the different topics that I wanted to talk about, so I do apologize for that, but hopefully you could follow everything pretty clearly. And so yeah, this was a really great memorial service to watch. I know that Nipsey and Kobe, I think, had televised or memorial services that were live streamed, but I did not watch them, and I don't know if I saw clips or something from them, but this was the first one that I watched all the way through, and it was very long, but I also think it was very worth it to watch something like this and just see the impact that it had, not only on the people who were speaking, but the people who attended and went out of their way to travel to this event, hopping on planes, parking a mile or two away and walking to the arena, waiting in line since 4 a.m. local time and all of that stuff. And so there were a lot of people who were truly impacted by what happened to Charlie Kirk and what this means for the rest of America and where we go from here. We are getting more divided than ever, and hopefully we can get back to a place of having more unity and really wanting to work together across the aisle and bridge those gaps and have those open debates and conversations so that we can at least better understand the other people who are in this world with us. So let me know what you think about the memorial service, the people who spoke at this event, in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.